that I grew up with Superman. I know Superman well. I watched the television shows, I read the comics, and the only thing I would say is it is a European fantasy to think that Superman would want to meet Beethoven. And when you talk about America and civilization, or this Western civilization, the American attitude was not that Europe needed to be saved because of civilization, but that civilization needed to be saved from Europe. This was the reaction. And so when you talk about the American attitude towards civilization, Americans after World War II, people like Dean Acheson, people like Harry Truman and on, thought Europeans could not be trusted. Only the United States could be trusted to keep peace. But I want to emphasize, not keep this civilization. America doesn't have a civilization. America piggybacks on top of the European civilization. And Americans, don't forget, are parochial. And the introduction to the Superman television show, which I watched as a child over and over again, always said that Superman came to Earth with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men, and what he was doing was fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. He was not fighting for the United Nations, he was not fighting for international peace, he was not fighting for Beethoven. And so the American nation, the American people have this peculiarity, and I'll end with this point. The funny thing about Americans, they are not isolationists, because embedded in their DNA, in their founding documents, is an internationalist principle, the principle of universal rights. It's the Enlightenment principle. But at the end of the day, Americans have felt that they are the only ones who can be trusted to carry out these principles. And so they don't have this sense of empathy and feeling about what you've been talking about today in terms of this civilization.
Well, as you can see, there is a huge difference between Europe and the US. And I believe Bob is right. Superman is an American hero. And being an American hero, Superman looks always to what catastrophe Superman can solve. That means there is a direct link between Superman and the situation of the world and the catastrophe that Superman can answer to. The problem is today that sometimes Superman do create catastrophe. So I want to thank Bob for the subprime crisis, for the fall of Lehman Brothers, for the triumph of Goldman Sachs, for Iraq, for Afghanistan, and I believe if it is true that there is no American civilization, I think we need to build one. We need to find a common answer between Europe and the US in order to avoid those catastrophes that unfortunately are creating not Superman, but Frankenstein. And a Frankenstein in the West can create Superman in the East. Bin Laden is a Superman in many countries, in many minds of people in the East. And in many ways, the big superpower, the big hyperpower of the US, which is, to my mind, a pure myth, but has contributed by a certain vision of the world to create many of the problems we are facing today. Because, yes, there is, in our culture, in the way we deal with life, a very strong difference with the US. The US are looking forward, always. Whatever problem, whatever difficulty, they are looking forward, looking to the future. They have this great capacity to invent and to never feel defeated by anything. They look forward. We, the Europeans, we are torn apart by and puzzled by our own anxiety, by the feeling that we may renew with the difficulties of the past. We are haunted by ghosts. But at the same time, we have something which is of very big value. We have a creative insatisfaction. We are not satisfied by the way the world and by the way Europe is. We want to change it. And in some ways, we have still the spirit of revolution alive in our blood. We do feel that we can do better. We don't feel that we are yet, and this is, we'll say, an American concept, we are not yet at the end of history. There's something else to be done. And something else that cannot be bought by dollars, that cannot be just materialized, but that means that man can be better than what it is. This is still the biggest challenge of today. But I want to give the floor to my neighbor.
You can see what a difficult job I have. You have these two brilliant, eloquent scholars and statesmen, and in between you have a simple, humble Asian. And I'm going to do what all simple, humble Asians do, which is to begin with an apology. And the apology is that I'm afraid I'm going to be saying some somewhat uncomfortable things for all of you. But the reason why I have to say many of these uncomfortable things, because for those of you who live in the West, whether it exists or not, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, there is a West. The world that is coming in the next 10 to 20 years, and Dominic was hinting at that, will be a difficult, uncomfortable one. And it's in some ways a result partly of demographics. There are about 6.8, 6.9 billion people in the world. About 800 to 900 million people live in Europe, America, Australia, Canada, the West. And about 6 billion live roughly outside. These 6 billion people have essentially been passengers on the bus of history for a few hundred years. Now, they no longer want to be passengers, and they want to be co-drivers with the West in moving world history forward. And as they want to do so, they recognize, and I want to emphasize this, both the strengths and the beauty, Rob, of Western civilization, but they also recognize and are equally aware of the ugly side of Western civilization. While I want to take you out of your comfort zones, I do want you to know that the world that is coming is a happy one. You may not believe this. And the reason why it's a happy one is because of your gift of modernity. There are going to be 1 or 2 billion people joining the middle classes in the next decade or two. And guess what this 1 or 2 billion people want? They want to live just like you, and they want to come to events like this and have time to relax and worry about the future of the world and not worry about the next meal, whether it's going to come there or not. Thank you.
Let's not talk about so much as we have here the superiority, the superior sensibility of the European, the superior sensibility and harmony of the Asian. We are going to be dealing, in the world to come, with the very traditional and oh so painful realities of international life that we've been dealing with for quite some time. Now, my personal view is that we will deal with it better to the degree that those of us who share the universal values that is the inheritance of the Western civilization do stick together.